All right, guys, so here we go. After first training sessions this past week, had a few questions that I wanted to address. I've already sent these out on Instagram as well, but I figure I can touch base on them a little more thoroughly here. So when we're looking at working out with clients, we've talked about positioning people in different types of resistance, and you look at something as simple as a stretch lying on the ground. And there are times where gravity can be your friend and times where gravity can be an asset, but there's a time where also gravity can be detrimental within a particular movement pattern. And this stretch that we see here is a very common and typical side-lying clamshell position where you open up the arms and close the arms. And as the arm that's articulating goes through a range of motion, in the position that this person is laying in right now, they are getting the greatest stretch from right knee across the torso to the right fingertips. When the hand is brought across the body and the clamshell is closed, there is no stretch. So you got to realize that how you go through a range of motion, positioned relative to gravity or positioned relative to where the final pulley is, matters. You can position yourself to a tie-off point using a band and work on external rotation or work on some type of shoulder abduction. And depending upon how you position your body relative to the tie-off will dictate how that resistance feels. So let's take a look here. As the person, let's go ahead and bring us back a little bit. So it goes here, so it's vertical. So if it's very much like a column where it's straight up and down, there's going to be almost no resistance being offered. There's going to be no assistance being offered. And really what's happening is gravity wants to pull the arm straight down into the GH joint. So if you look at this, the head of the humerus is actually being pushed down into the GH joint here. When the hands were closed, you have the back of the shoulder is what's going to be activated because that's being used to help raise the arm. Now, as we go through the range of motion, it ends up shutting off the back of the shoulder. The chest is now being used eccentrically to keep the arm from flopping to the floor, and then it becomes an exercise where we're dropping the arm in a controlled manner by using eccentric loading on the chest or eccentric contractions, and then it just becomes a straight up stretch of the chest and torso. So as you go through any range of motion, you're going to have the effects of gravity are going to ebb and flow as you go through a range of motion. And when you have this, you kind of look at it and you go, you have concentric and eccentric. You have this phasing that happens when you go through any particular exercise. And actually there's a third component, right? Isometric. But you have primarily concentric and eccentric. And we talk many times about concentric and eccentric movement. And when you go from a single joint environment to a multi-joint environment, it really changes the complexity of what is concentric, what is eccentric, what is being passively moved versus actively moved, how is gravity assisting, how is gravity actually be a detrimental force and offering resistance. So, you start to really evaluate movement patterns and it becomes a totally different animal. Now, if we look at this, this is a transverse plane movement pattern. These guys are similar but not exact. I get that, I understand that. And the resistance is being offered differently, one of which is a medicine ball, the other two are dual action pulley. Now, with a dual action pulley, the arms are staying the same, this part's staying symmetrical, and the resistance is staying pretty symmetrical. Now, and over here we have a push, pivot and push, whereas the person is rotating, they're changing the length of the moment arm and are pushing the hand away from the body, which is changing the level of resistance, but also what needs to be taken into account is how the start position and end position looks. And that's the same here, how start position and end position looks. Right now, the toes are lined up with the cable in a 90-degree fashion with nose and hands, and I'll explain that later on in class so you see it. But if we change the foot position to a more open stance or closed stance, that's going to change how the body recruits muscle to make the movement happen. Over here, we have two main forces that are going on, one of which is the weight of the medicine ball wants to be pulled down to the floor, straight down 9.8 meters per second squared. We know that's a constant. But the person who's throwing the medicine ball into the wall is basically imparting force into the ball hits the wall bounces off the wall and comes back to the person. And there is momentum that's being delivered apply the ball from the wall, the recoil from the wall, into the person when they catch. They have to use eccentric loading to decelerate that medicine ball. They flick the switch, they have their stretch shortening cycle, and bam, they're explosive again. So let's go ahead and take a look at this, but keep in mind where resistance is coming from. Here, it's two plane. Here, it's coming really from one plane. You can kind of see with the cable, and here, it's one plane with the cable. So let's take a look at the differences between these three. And the difference would be if you have somebody who throws the medicine ball into the wall and just drops to the floor and you have to pick it up and then throw it again, that changes the resistance that's being offered in this exercise. Let's go over here, low to high. And for sure, you know, how we change the body position relative to that tie-off point or to the last pulley matters. Now with this, notice the moment arm, push, bent elbow position, straight elbow position. And that matters in terms of the moment arm is changing. You're basically pushing that handle away from you, which makes it a more unstable environment. So again, nothing more than gravity being redirected over pulleys to a cable, gravity being redirected over pulleys to a cable, gravity pulling the medicine ball down, but you're also getting another vector of resistance, if you will. It's momentum based, but it's coming from the medicine ball bouncing off of the wall. The harder you throw it, the more you're going to have coming back at you. All right, let's go ahead and jump over to the next one. This was something we talked about with one person who has a client who had some ankle issues on a treadmill. And I pointed out that when you look at exercise and you look at people who are walking, you have a two-plane basic movement pattern that happens in the pelvis, right? Anterior posterior pelvic tilt, plus you have rotation that happens in the pelvis, and it's asymmetrical. And when you look at this, I love the noted anatomist, and I urge you guys to go ahead and take a look at this person on YouTube because he's wonderful at explaining stuff. I believe the gentleman is a doctor, like an actual doctor, not PhD, nothing like that. He's an actual MD who teaches courses in anatomy to medical students, and he does it in a way that is so unbelievably intuitive and easy to understand. It's fantastic. But in this, what we were getting across is, and he does a great job of explaining how the muscles in the hip work and how you have different muscles that help in internal and external rotation and are complementary to muscles that help also in abduction and adduction. And what I like about this, I'm going to go ahead and start this and fast forward it, but he does a good job of explaining those two, but he also does a really good job of explaining this. And this, my friends, is a great example, if I can close this, of how you have the pelvis, the femur and the femur, and how the foot responds. Now you have one foot that stays still and you have another foot that moves and you have a line of intended movement that you see here. And I'm going to let this play out. I'm probably going to fast forward it just a little bit. So And I want to point this out because this becomes important because many times you think about this, the pelvis staying still, and this is rotating within the joint. Now, really, when you think about this, this is staying still, and the gate, if you will, the pelvis, is being swung like a gate when the swing leg is brought through. So realize internal and external rotation can happen in a joint by having the limb move or the main part of the body, the main structure of the body move. So in this example, just kind of keep keep in the back of your mind how this is articulating and this is articulating as we bring this as we swing the leg through. And what I like about this is he shows what happens is if this does not articulate and the ankle does not articulate, what happens to the foot? So you look at this and you go, what has to happen to allow people to walk forward? There has to be articulation here, and there has to be articulation at the ankle. Yeah. You got to externally rotate that, right? And so you look at that and you go, holy smokes, man. If you're on a treadmill and you're running at X amount of miles an hour, you can evaluate your client and get an idea of how many strides they have per minute and multiply that by a 20-minute workout session and how many hundreds of strides they may have. And if they have dysfunction in the hip or at the ankle, and it's causing them to have some type of internal rotation or external rotation, to be quite frank, you can just imagine how that would translate either up or down the kinetic chain. It's not a one-way street. So you may find with some of your clients, when you get into working with them, you'll have to work on ankle mobility to start off as the foundation for everything and then work your way up. Or perhaps you have to work on hip mobility to assist them to work on things downstream in the kinetic chain. It's not going to be a perfect science. You'll have to become more astute at being able to evaluate your person and evaluate what's going on. But I just remember this from a noted anatomist when I was talking with this person about their client. And I'm like, I got to get this up for you guys because it's a wonderful, wonderful example. And I'm telling you, you can utilize this for your other classes as well. His website, he's just really good in terms of what he presents and how he presents. Now, if we take a look at this, we talked asymmetrical loading in class, and this was an example of how you can have asymmetrical loading. And this is done with, if you look at this, you have a two joint exercise on one side of the body, a single joint exercise on the other. It's the same weight, so you have symmetrical loading in terms of weight, but you have asymmetrical movement patterns, which is going to provide an asymmetrical moment arm on each side. Over here, you would have the same weight on each side, but you have asymmetrical loading in terms of this resistance is coming at a bit of an off angle because of the pulley, and this resistance is being offered straight down to the floor. So your asymmetry in loading can come from not only the weight itself, but can come from the movement pattern. And I'll tell you, I saw somebody in class the other day doing asymmetrical loading with a single arm dumbbell press, and I'm like, that is spot on good stuff right there, because you're asking the body to fire asymmetrically. And also when you do that, you're asking everything in here, in that whole core midsection, to do some serious contraction, to be able to stay on the bench and not fall off. Yeah, now go ahead and switch. Long lever one side, short lever on the other. Symmetrical loading. Just it's interesting when you look at these and you start to look at things a little differently, where you can have asymmetry in the movement pattern, but same resistance, or you can have asymmetry in the same resistance, the same amount of weight, but how it's loaded, right? So you can start to look at this so many different ways and evaluate movement and be able to now program in different types of asymmetry. Wonderful, wonderful stuff, guys, that you're doing in there. And I like what I'm seeing so far. And so to that end, just keep doing what you're doing and keep building on what we're doing in class.